Well, can I start by saying a very happy Valentine's Day to everybody who's here. And what a bizarre, strange day it is. I'm sure in this room alone, many of us have a great deal of different opinions on Valentine's Day and how you feel about it. And I'm sure some of those feelings, both positive and negative, are probably quite strong. You know, I was going to share a video just to start off, before I started to preach, like a 2-minute video about Valentine's Day. So I went on YouTube and looked for Christian videos about Valentine's Day. And after about 20 minutes, I just could not do it anymore. Some were just so cringy, and some were trying to sell me something. I'm pretty sure most of them were trying to sell me something. So I didn't do it in the end, I gave in. But I'm sure, there's a huge variety of opinions on what Valentine's Day means to different people. For some, it's a great day. It's a great opportunity to show somebody that you love them and to have a gesture for that. For other people, it's a chore. And for some people, it's a day to avoid. Just avoid. Some people really like it. Some people can't stand it. I'm wearing a new wedding ring today, by the way, that I got given for Valentine's Day. My last one either shrunk or something else happened. I think it might have been my fingers. But anyway, so I have a new wedding ring. So I really enjoy Valentine's Day. I really enjoy, the gesture side of it. But that's just me. But I wonder, what is Valentine's Day? You see, in many ways, it's a way of celebrating love. Well, kind of. It's one of those holidays, really, that's become a greeting card holiday. Where it's a time, actually, it's not really about love, it's about spending money. It's about extravagance. Something that is actually so far removed from anything to do from St. Valentine. For some people, Valentine's Day is a heart-shaped helium balloon. For some, it's a last-minute dash to a garage to buy some flowers that are past their best. For some, it's a good excuse to do something nice. For others, it's a way of not going out for a meal because the price is double and the food gets a bit too posh. What has any of all of this stuff got to do with St. Valentine? Well, the answer is not a lot. Although, and you all know I have a certain anti-greeting card sentiment, the Valentine's Day card actually does have a root in the original story about Valentine. So who was Valentine? Where does this day come from? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I'm planning to talk about that very thing. The origin of Valentine's Day isn't actually that romantic. Not in a traditional sense, anyway. But it is a powerful story. Saint Valentine, or let's just call him Valentine, because anyone who follows Jesus is a saint. He was a Roman priest during the time of an emperor called Claudius. And during the time of Claudius, the church was going through persecution. And as often happens when the church is persecuted, areas that are important to God get attacked. And the church is asked to compromise on those things or to suffer as a consequence. And what Claudius did is he made a law that prohibited the marriage of young people. Now that might seem to us like a bit of an odd thing to do. But there's some things to bear in mind first. So first of all, Claudius actually did this for a reason. And his reasoning was, unmarried soldiers fight better than married soldiers. Which, if you think about it, that makes sense. One reason is married soldiers have dependents. Therefore, they're less willing to be able to die in battle. They don't want to leave a widow and an orphan behind. Plus, a married soldier is always wanting to be going home, to be with his family. Speaking as someone who used to spend a lot of my time with my job traveling, I completely get that. When you're away, all you want to do is come home. So I can't imagine being away for months and years on end So Claudius knew this, and he thought, well, if they can't get married, that's not an issue. If you're part of an army whose main goal was to conquer the known world, then you're going to do a lot of traveling. And a lot of people are needed to die for that cause. So Claudius decided, let's just prohibit marriage for young people, and you don't have that problem. Let them spend their time in the army, fight for Rome, then they can get married when they're older, if they want to. The second thing to take into account is this was ancient Rome, which was not a society that was well known for its conservative values. It was, by all accounts, an extremely permissive society, more permissive than perhaps today, which I know is hard to imagine, and maybe we're catching up. Polygamy and multiple partners was much more popular in ancient Rome than the idea of one man and one woman living together. So the idea of getting married and staying with only one person wasn't that big a deal in Rome at the time. So if you put that law that Claudius put in place into context, the law kind of makes sense. And it wasn't seen as generally unkind to society. Except when it came to Christians. For Christians, that law was a problem. And what was happening was many young Roman citizens were starting to get saved. And to a Christian, marriage is a sacred thing. Marriage is a representation of Jesus' commitment to his church. It's about one man and one woman for life. So the church immediately had a problem. This right had been taken away from them. The idea of marriage in their society was under attack, and the church was unsure about how it was going to react. Now again, that's not unusual. When the church is attacked through its values, the first reaction the church often has is, what do we do? Do we go along with this? Do we make a stand against it? Do we compromise? Or do we hold firm to what we believe is true? It probably doesn't take a lot for you to think areas that the church are facing that same situation today, where we're having that very conversation. Do we need to change this, or do we stay strong in our values? You see, where society doesn't care about the issue, the restrictions and the limits don't really affect society. It's just the Christians who are therefore expected to toe the line and not object. You see, this is what Valentine was all about. He defended the idea of Christian marriage. He would encourage his young people to get married. And then, not just encourage them, he would then marry them in secret. So Valentine took a stand for Christian marriage. He would not be caught up with changing laws around him, but only God's law mattered. He cared for these young people too much to allow them to have to compromise their faith and to go against the Word of God. So far, not very greeting card, is it? But it was only a matter of time before Valentine was caught, because he was breaking the law. And that's exactly what happened. He was caught, he was arrested, and he was put on trial. And of course, he was found guilty because, let's be fair, he was guilty. He was imprisoned, and he was tortured for performing marriages against the command of the emperor. In the year 296 AD, he was sentenced to a 3-part execution: a beating, a stoning, and then finally decapitation. Now, I don't know how necessary that last one probably was, as stoning would probably pretty much do the job. And this was all because of where he stood. on the issue of marriage. Now, I don't mean to get off topic, but you know what? That is not unusual today, to see Christians getting treated harshly because of their views on marriage. Look at the Ashes Baking Company. Publicly beaten up, verbally dragged through the courts for defending a Christian view of marriage. And they're currently in appeal. And it's interesting because society was let them have it. Let them have it. Let them have it. That seems to be changing over the last couple of weeks, which is interesting. But generally, to society at large, the Ashes Baking Company are the bad guys. They deserve what's happening to them. But all they were doing was standing up for the God's view of marriage. You see, we might be more civil when we do it today, but society isn't that much more different to the Rome of Claudius. Most people in Rome, when they heard about Valentine getting locked up, would have thought, good, he deserves it. He got exactly what was coming to him. Serves him right. Now, at this point is where the definite factual stuff might end and the stories start. And we don't really know what happened when Valentine was in prison. So the rest of the story from here on is probably legend and less rooted in fact. However, it's where a lot of our Valentine's Day traditions come from. And also, as I read the story, I go along with this. There's nothing in this that seems unlikely or hard to believe for me, and nothing that doesn't happen in church today. And the story is that one of the men who was to judge Valentine, who was one of the judges who brought him into line with Roman law, was a man called Asterius. And this guy's daughter was blind. And Valentine prayed for his daughter, and she received a healing. And the effect of that daughter being healed was so astounding that Asterius actually became a Christian as a result of that healing. Let me tell you, when God starts healing, people get saved. Why do we want to see healing and miracles? Yes, it's because we want people's lives to improve. But really, it's because it brings salvation. Even when he was in prison, Valentine was doing whatever ministry he would get the opportunity to do. Somebody's blind? Hey, bring her. I'll pray for her. And the story continues that after this occasion, the daughter would then bring Valentine food when Valentine was in prison. Now again, this wasn't unusual. In a Roman prison, if you wanted to eat, someone had to bring you food. If they didn't bring you food, you didn't really get to eat that much. For example, the Apostle Paul, when he was in a Roman prison, the churches that he ministered to, such as the church in Philippi, brought him food, and in some of his letters he thanks them for that. And Valentine would thank this daughter for the food she was bringing. And he would write letters thanking her for what she'd done. And the last words Valentine would write before his execution were to this girl. And he inspired the romantic letters that we see today by signing the letter at the end, "From your Valentine." That said, he didn't intend it in a romantic way, but in gratitude for the goodness that she had shown him. And that's the start of traditions. From letters, to cards, to stuffed animals, to balloons filled with helium. Seems quite a strange trajectory, but hey. Valentine gave his life for what he believed. And he believed marriage was important to God. And he stood up for that in a world that believed otherwise. Dare I say, God's asking us to do the same thing? To stand up for the importance of marriage in a world that believes otherwise? Marriage is a symbol of God's love. We even say as much during wedding vows. It's a symbol of Christ's love for his church. And although today is seen as a celebration of love, actually it started as a protection of marriage. Something that once again today is under threat, and the church, by and large, is rolling over and letting it happen. But love is a good thing to celebrate. Unfortunately, today, we just think of love as a feeling or an emotion. Or if we're cynical, that love is actually just a myth and doesn't exist, and it's just a bunch of scientific stuff going on in our head. But love is more than that. Love is more than a feeling. If it was just a feeling, it would fade and it would change. But love's not really like that. Love is not a greeting card emotion or a short-lived infatuation. Love is never-ending. Love is committed. Love really is a choice. Love is a decision that you make. You know, when Jesus was teaching, Jesus would often speak about love. And one of the most profound statements Jesus ever made on love was this. It's in John 15, verses 10 to 14. John 15, 10 to 14. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. If you are my friends, you will do what I commanded you. So the first thing he says is, love one another as he has loved us. Make that choice, because it's a choice, to love one another with the same love that Jesus has for you. I've got to say, if we as a church manage to do that, if Christians manage to love one another as Christ loved the church, this world would be a different place altogether. If we could love each other just a fraction of how his love is for us, I tell you what, that's war gone. That's infighting amongst churches gone. That's betrayal right out of the window. If we all made the decision to love a little bit more like Jesus, imagine the effect we would have on the world around us. He then goes on to tell us that the greatest expression of that love, what the greatest expression of any love could be, that someone makes a choice to give up their life for their friends. It's interesting that he tells us to love like he does, and then he follows it up with that statement. Because that's just what Jesus did. He gave up his life. Jesus willingly got on a cross specifically to save us. Doesn't that just blow your mind? That Jesus gave up his life for you. For me. That absolutely blows my mind. Now maybe you're sat there this morning and it doesn't blow your mind. Maybe to you it is no big deal that Jesus died for his friends. That's something so many people have done throughout history. Loads of people have died for others. What's so special about Jesus? I remember hearing about a soldier once, and he really struggled to understand the significance of Jesus' sacrifice. Because for him, what Jesus did on the cross was not so significant. In his life, he'd been in many conflicts, and he had seen many people give up their lives for their friends. In fact, his life had once been saved by a friend who threw himself on a grenade for him. And this man said, what's the difference? This man gave his life so that I could live. This friend of mine died and paid that ultimate price. What made the sacrifice of Jesus anything more than what he did? And the reply that was given to this soldier is such a challenge. Yes, what that soldier did was a great act of love. He gave his life for his friend. He did what Jesus described as great love. And what that soldier did was a great thing, a brave thing. But here's the difference. He would never have thrown himself on that grenade to save the enemy. No soldier would throw themselves on a grenade to save an enemy troop who was about to shoot him. But you see, that's what Jesus did. Romans 5:10, for while if we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son. Much more now that we are reconciled, we have been saved by his life. While we were enemies of God, Christ died for us. In fact, Jesus died so that his enemies could become his friends. Now that's really something. He describes the greatest love as giving up your life for your friends, and then he goes even further than that and gives up his life for his enemies, so that they could be reconciled and become friends. What an amazing love Jesus has. This is how John describes it in 1 John 4:10. This is love, not that we have loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sin. See, John gets specific on the reason for the death of Jesus here. It's love. He came because of love as an atoning sacrifice for us. Why is it we need an atoning sacrifice? Why do we need such a great act of love? Well, John tells us it's because of our sin. Now, you could be sat there thinking this morning, enemy of God? When did I become an enemy of God? Isn't that a little bit strong? But you see, it's sin that does that. What sin does is it puts distance between man and God. Sin, by its very nature, is going against the will of God. That's what it is. It's turning our backs on God. So yes, God says enemy. The word for this sin and this effect is enmity. It puts enmity between us and God. And that word enmity means hostility. It means opposition. And that's what sin is to God. It's an act of opposition. It's an act of hostility against his plans for our life. God did not make us into his enemies. We did that, all on our own. When we put ourselves first, when we do what we want to do rather than what he wants to do. And we all do it. Even you. I'm trying not to look directly at anybody. But even you. You might very well be thinking that you don't, that you're a good person who doesn't get it wrong. Well, this is what John would say to you, 1 John 1:8. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. In other words, if you say you have no sin, the Bible is calling you a liar. Not only are you lying, you're lying to yourself. And lying to yourself is still lying. Sin is a big problem. It's a universal problem. If sin was not a big deal, if actually we were pretty much all okay, then the death of Jesus makes no sense. It means Jesus died for nothing. But a big problem requires a big solution. Sin is the problem, and love is the solution. Romans 5:8, it says this, but God shows his love for us, that while we were still sinners, while you were still a sinner, Christ died for you. While you were still lost, he loved you and he died for you. You know, today, on Valentine's Day, we will see a lot of gestures of love. Some of them will be lovely. They'll be romantic. Some of them will be grand. All of them will be diminished slightly if they get put on Facebook. Let me tell you guys, it's a lot more romantic if you don't Instagram a picture of it afterwards. Okay? Now, it's easy to say love is not about gestures, and I get that. But actually, love is not an emotion. Love is a choice. There's a song that anyone who was a teenage Christian in the 90s probably came across at some point, and it's called Love is a Verb. And despite being a really cheesy song, it makes a good point. Love is a word that means action rather than emotion. Love is more about what you do than how you feel. So love sort of is about gestures, just not empty ones. Has anyone ever heard of the 5 love languages? There's 5 love languages that apparently we all respond to. And the 5 love languages are all something you do. They're all gestures. They're all action. And love needs action to be real. And the 5 love languages are gifts. We all respond to these in different ways. Some people feel love when they're given a gift. Some people, it's quality time that they need. Some people look for words of affirmation. Some, it's acts of service. And some, it's touch. All of those things, all of those 5 require doing something. Not just feeling something. And Jesus showed us love by doing something. It was the greatest act of love that the world has ever seen. The cross is love in action. The cross reaches all 5 of those love languages, you know. It is the greatest gift that we could ever receive. He gave up his time in heaven to be one of us. He continually tells us how important we are. It is the greatest act of service that you could ever imagine. And touch, the cross has touched lives across thousands of years. The cross has touched my life. And my life was never the same again after it was touched by the cross. Now, that's not to say love is in no way, that's not to say love's not at all emotional. Anyone who's ever been in love knows that love is emotional. Anyone who has become a parent knows that love is incredibly emotional. But they also know it's more than just that. You know what? You could feel as emotional as you want about your kid. But if that doesn't involve some kind of action, your kid will suffer. But you know that love a parent has for a child, that overwhelming sense of love, that's really strong. But it is nothing compared to the love of God that we have. The love that God has for you is so much stronger than any love you have ever experienced. And it's easy to forget how strong his love for us is. But it's amazing. It's unending. It is without bounds. What shall separate us from the love of God? Neither height nor depth nor nothing shall separate us from the love of God. I don't care what's going on I do care what's going on in your life. But let me tell you, it doesn't separate you from the love of God. It doesn't. It might seem so big, but compared to the love of God, it is tiny. Zephaniah 3:17. Love this verse. It says, "The Lord your God is with you, the mighty warrior who saves. He will take great delight in you. In his love he will no longer rebuke you, but he will rejoice over you with singing." God sings because he loves you so much. He takes great delight in you. He rejoices over you with singing. He sings he dances, he gets excited because he loves you so much. He came and he died for you. He paid the ultimate price because that's how much it cost. Without the cross, we're lost. You know, today is a celebration of love. What better way to celebrate love than to acknowledge the greatest love that has ever taken place? And let me tell you, Jesus is calling all of us to him. He's calling over us. And he's singing and he's dancing because he loves us so much. But just like any love, he wants to be first in your life. Nobody wants a love that's second best, especially God. Amelia would not be best pleased if my love for somebody else was greater than my love for her. You wouldn't, would you? No. God's the same. He doesn't want us loving somebody more than him. He wants that love to be returned. Of course he does. Because he knows that when we return his love, then we are living the best way we could ever live our lives. He wants us to love each other as he has loved us. And that might mean we pay a cost for each other. You know, Valentine gave his life for his love for the people he was looking after. Following Jesus does mean things change. Some things have to die. You know, the greatest act of love is to give up your life for your friends. Well, let me tell you, becoming a Christian means you give up part of your lives and let them die. And he said, if we were his friends, we follow his commandments. Let me tell you, giving something up when you're in love is no big deal. It's no big deal. When we get married, we give up our, I'm going to say freedom, but I mean that in a good way. But it's no big deal because of love. We give things up when we're in love, and it's no big deal. When we become a Christian, let me tell you, the things that God is asking you to give up, if your love is focused on him, it's no big deal. It's gone. In fact, don't want it. If he doesn't want me to have it, don't want it. Jesus said we are his friends if we follow his commandments. He said if we love him, we'd obey him. And you know what? If we really loved him, we'd be glad to. We'd be happy to. And he's calling you to him. I wonder, are we ready to respond? Because he is the only answer to the problem of sin. He is the only answer. And all he's doing is asking us to love him. Let's pray.